going to talk about multiplying polynomials with binomials and trinomials today. This is what you'll see the most of. So we're going to start with example A, and we'll start with binomials times binomials. So we have x minus 4 times x plus 9. When we did just binomials times a polynomial, remember we had to do every piece, every term by the binomial on the outside. In this case, we're going to do each term, so this term here, by this term, and by this term. So we've got to think about every term has to be multiplied by the other term. So we're going to actually do the first term times the first term. So we have x times x gives us x squared. Then we're going to do the outside term. So first term times the last term there. And we have plus 9x. Then we do the inside terms together, so negative 4x, and then the last term here. So we have a negative 36. Then we look and we combine like terms. We notice that we have a positive 9x and a negative 4x, so we end up with an x squared plus 5x minus 36. And this is already in standard form, and so we are done. That is our answer. On this one, you'll see when we do the same thing, we'll do the first term times the first term. So we have x squared. The first term times the last term. We have plus 7x. Then we have the middle terms. The middle terms. So we have plus 3x. And then we have the last terms. So plus 21. And then here we would combine like terms. We have a 7x and a 3x, so we end up with x squared plus 10x plus 21, and this is in standard form. Now, we use a little acronym called FOIL, F-O-I-L, and this means do the first term, or first terms, by each other. Then we do the outside terms by each other, the inside terms by each other, and then the last terms by each other. So you'll often hear this acronym FOIL. So when you think about FOIL, you'll think about like tinfoil, I often think about. So you're thinking about each piece has to be done by each piece. Now if you look at example B, if you'll notice how I did my little marks, it almost looks like a little smiley face man. You can think about this here, these being his eyes, his little nose, and his little mouth. So you can almost think you have to make a little smiley face man. The biggest thing you have to remember is that every piece has to touch every piece. So we'll put a little note here. This is our smiley face man. That may help some of you visual learners. There's 3 for you to try. I want you to try them and start noticing a pattern that you see, that you can do some of these very simple ones in your head. And we'll get to more of that. So pause the video and then continue to see if you've gotten it right. So here are the answers to the 3 problems, C, D, and E. So how did you do? Here's a 1 star. I want you to notice that you'll find something a little bit different in the inside term of your polynomial. So go ahead and work it like before and see if you got it right. Here's your final answer. How did you do? So let's talk about some quick ways to multiply mentally. So these are some basic binomials by binomials. You'll notice that all the coefficients on the x's are just 1s. So if you'll notice and you start looking at the patterns that were created, we had an x and an x. X times x is always x squared. So I know if I'm doing a binomial times a binomial with a coefficient of just 1, I square the first term. Then if I look at the last term, I know I multiply those. So I have a negative 4 times a negative 2, and I get a negative 8. So that's going to be my last term. Then if I look here and I just think about this is a negative 4, and then I know that if I'm taking a negative 4, I'm going to get a negative 4x. And then if I'm using the x and the 2, I'm going to get a 2x. So when I combine those together, I end up with a negative 2x. So then this is my final answer. So if the next one, I would square the first term, multiply 5 times 8, I get 40. Then I'm basically adding 5, because that's a plus, and that's a plus, I get a positive 13 with my x. Okay, so you start seeing a pattern. So then I can do x squared. The last one, negative 14. And then I add these two together, positive 7 and negative 2, and I get 5x. Okay, so try a few of these and see if you can do them quickly the same way. So here are the answers to the ones. Were you able to do them very quickly, and did you get them right? Now, when we have ones that have coefficients that are bigger than 1, we can still do the same thing, but we got to think about what's happening. So we use the 2 and the 4, and we get a quick 8x squared. We can look at our last terms, a negative 1 and a positive 3, and we get a negative 3. Then we have to think about our middle terms. What's going to make up our middle terms? We know with this it's going to have an x, so we know our middle term is going to have an x. And we look here, and we have a negative 4x, and then here we have a 6x. So if I have a negative 4x and a positive 6x together, I know I have a 2x. A 2x that is positive. So these are a little bit harder to do mentally, but it's still, the pattern is still the same. So take a second and try to do a couple harder ones mentally. Now let's move on to trinomials. So we're actually multiplying now trinomials by binomials. So this is a little bit more complex that you see. You have multiple pieces. So still we have to think of every term has to touch another. The biggest reminder that I can give you here is to be very organized. So I'm going to put that on your notes. Make sure you put that. Remember to be very organized. So we're going to take our first term here and our very first polynomial, or binomial here, and we're going to multiply it by every term. So we're going to do 2x times 3x squared, and we have a 6x to the third. Then we're going to go by the 8x. 2 times 8 gives us our 16. We have x here and an x here, so we have an x squared. Then we're going to do 2x times our 7, so we end up with 14x. Now, we're going to switch and do the other piece, our negative 5, by every piece. So this one's going to go by 3x, and this time I'm going to stack them on top of each other because I'm going to combine like terms. I know that I'm going to get a whole lot of terms that are same. Instead of doing a whole big long row, I'm going to go ahead and combine like terms here. So I'm going to do a negative 5 times 3x squared. I'm going to end up with a negative 15x squared. So I went ahead and put it under the x squared. Then I'm going to do negative 5 times a positive 8x. So I'm going to end up with a negative 40x. So I'm going to put it under my 14x. Then I have a negative 5 times a positive 7. So I'm going to end up with a negative 35. There's no like term there, so I'm going to have it hanging over to the side. So now I'm going to just add these all together. So this is like what we learned a few days ago. So pull them straight down, 6x cubed, plus this one's just going to be a 1x squared, so I could just write x squared, same as 1x squared, and then a negative 26x, and minus 35. Remember to always look and make sure it's in standard form. This one does have a degree of 3, a degree of 2, a degree of 1, and a degree of 0, so it is in standard form already. There's nothing else we can do to it. No more combining. Here's a binomial times a trinomial. Go ahead and try this one. Pause the video and then see if you've gotten it right. Alright, so when you work this one out, you've gotten 4 pieces. Start noticing these patterns that you have. Make sure you pay attention to your signs. Notice I highlighted the negatives. When I do a negative times a negative, I get a positive, so be very careful with your signs. Remember, that's a common mistake. On number C, this is one that you might see. Notice that they wrote the trinomial first, then the binomial on one side, and then compare it to the other side where they did the binomial first and then the trinomial. They're exactly the same. These are an all-solution type problem. So if I was trying to solve for x, if they're exactly the same, just like in equations, then you're going to have an all solution. So this is an all solution where you'll get the same thing on each side. It would cancel out to be the same exact thing. So an all solution type of situation with polynomials involved. Here's a 3-star. You'll notice that this one has the 3 trinomial by trinomial. So go ahead and pause the video, try it, and see if you've gotten it right. All right, use different colors here to help you out a little bit. So each piece was multiplied by all the terms in the second polynomial, and you'll see that then the red was the first one, and then the middle term in the first polynomial in the green, and then the last term, pay attention to those signs, those negatives that were in the purple. And then we combine all like terms, you have a very large polynomial here, and you can't get any simpler than what is written here. So for your procedure, the first thing you have to remember is you're going to distribute. You're multiplying all pieces by all the other pieces. So you can think of the FOIL method or the smiley face man. Combine your like terms. Lining them up is very helpful. Pay attention to those signs. On the hard copy of the notes attached to Canvas, you'll find on the last page a page full of small binomials by binomials with 1 as their coefficient to practice doing those mentally. Try those with the different signs. See if you can do them mentally. We will play a game next week around the world playing these to see if we can get really good at them. All right, go ahead and try your practice.